On October 19, 2022, a county maintenance worker unlocked a Forest Service cabin that had not been opened in years. Inside, sitting upright on a wooden chair, was a woman who had been missing for 3 winters. She was facing the door. Her hands were folded in her lap. The cabin was locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry, no trail of footprints, no weapon, no indication of how she had survived the time she was gone, and no immediate explanation for why she had stopped trying to leave. Her name was Emily Carver. She was 32 years old when she disappeared. On the morning of June 3, 2019, Emily Carver left her apartment in Fort Collins, Colorado at 5:42 a.m. Her departure was captured on a parking lot security camera. She was wearing gray hiking pants, a blue fleece, and trail runners. Her brown hair was braided, tied back with a black elastic. She carried a 40-liter backpack, fully loaded. She did not appear rushed. Emily worked as an environmental compliance analyst for the state. Her job required attention to detail and careful documentation. Colleagues described her as risk-averse. She followed procedures. She planned ahead. That weekend, she intended to complete a solo loop hike in the Medicine Bow Route National Forest near the Colorado-Wyoming border. The planned route was 26 miles over 3 days. She had filed her itinerary with the Forest Service's Voluntary Backcountry Registry. She had emailed the same itinerary to her sister, Megan, and to a co-worker who also hiked. Her plan included mile markers, estimated times, and elevation changes. She noted weather forecasts. She listed her gear. She included emergency contacts. At 6:18 a.m., Emily stopped at a gas station in Red Feather Lakes. Surveillance footage shows her purchasing a map, trail mix, and a bottle of water. She used her debit card. The receipt timestamp matched the video. She thanked the cashier and asked about recent trail conditions. At 7:02 a.m., her phone connected briefly to a tower along County Road 86. That was the last recorded signal. Emily arrived at the Montgomery Pass trailhead at approximately 7:40 a.m., based on a witness statement later provided by a retired school teacher named Alan Pierce. Pierce recalled seeing a blue Subaru with out-of-state plates parked neatly within the lines. He remembered because of how carefully it was positioned. Emily signed the physical trail log at 7:44 a.m. Her handwriting was neat. She wrote solo under party size. She estimated her return for Sunday evening. The weather that morning was clear. Temperature at elevation was 58 degrees. Winds were low. There were no storm advisories. Emily was known to be competent outdoors. She had completed wilderness first aid training. She carried a GPS unit, a paper map, a compass, and a personal locator beacon. She had water purification tablets. Her pack weight was consistent with a 3-day trip. She had no known medical conditions. On Sunday night, June 5, Megan Carver texted Emily asking if she had made it back safely. There was no response. By Monday morning, Megan called her phone. It rang until voicemail. At 9:11 a.m., Megan contacted the Larimer County Sheriff's Office to report her sister overdue. The initial response followed standard protocol. Deputies confirmed the itinerary and verified Emily's vehicle at the trailhead. The Subaru was still there. It was locked. Nothing appeared disturbed. No note was left inside or outside the vehicle. Search and rescue operations began at 2:30 p.m. that afternoon. Ground teams moved along the planned loop in both directions. Canines were deployed starting from the trailhead. A helicopter conducted aerial sweeps focusing on exposed ridgelines and drainage areas. There was no sign of injury. No torn clothing. No blood. No discarded gear. The dogs tracked Emily's scent for approximately 11 miles before losing it near a rocky section where the trail intersected with a seasonal creek. From there was nothing. By the end of the first week, the search had expanded to over 40 square miles. Volunteers joined official teams. Infrared cameras were used at night. Weather turned colder. Rain moved in on June 10, complicating ground conditions. Emily's personal locator beacon had never been activated. On June 14, after 11 days with no trace, the operation was scaled back. Officials cited diminishing likelihood of survival and increasing risk to searchers. The case was reclassified from rescue to recovery. Megan Carver gave interviews. She described her sister as methodical. She insisted Emily would not have gone off route without reason. She said Emily did not panic. Posters were distributed in nearby towns. Online forums speculated about falls, animal encounters, voluntary disappearance. None were supported by evidence. Months passed. In October of that year, a hunter reported finding a boot near a creek 4 miles from the original trail. The boot was later confirmed not to belong to Emily. The report was removed from the case file. Winter came early to the high country. By spring of 2020, the investigation was effectively dormant. Emily Carver was presumed dead, though no declaration was made. Her Subaru remained impounded. And then, 3 years later, someone opened a door that had not been opened since before she disappeared. The cabin was designated FS 1187, a single-room structure maintained by the U.S. Forest Service and used intermittently by rangers and survey crews. It sat at 9,400 feet elevation, 4 miles off the nearest maintained road. Access required a narrow service trail that was not listed on recreational maps. According to maintenance logs, the cabin had last been inspected in April of 2018. No issues were noted at that time. The lock was original. In 2019, no search teams documented checking FS 1187. It was outside Emily Carver's planned route by approximately 6 miles and did not appear on the recreational map she purchased that morning. To reach it, a hiker would need to leave the main trail, cross uneven terrain, and follow an unmarked path used primarily for utility access. During the initial investigation, authorities focused on Emily's itinerary. They noted that she had planned conservative daily distances. Her first day ended at a designated campsite near a lake. Searchers found no sign that she ever arrived there. The campsite showed no disturbance consistent with overnight use. No fire ring had been used. No food wrappers were present. On June 6, a search team reported faint boot impressions near the creek where the canine trail ended. The impressions were partial and could not be conclusively matched. Soil conditions suggested they were several days old. The area was photographed, logged, and flagged. No continuation of the prints was found. Investigators considered the possibility of a navigational error. The intersection near the creek included a faint spur that could be mistaken for the main trail, particularly if visibility dropped. However, weather records show clear skies that morning. Emily carried both electronic and paper navigation tools. Her GPS unit, later recovered from her vehicle's inventory, had been registered to her account but had no tracking capability enabled. There was no evidence Emily had removed it from her pack prior to departure. Cell phone records confirmed no calls, messages, or data usage after the brief tower ping at 7:02 a.m. Her bank accounts remained untouched. Her apartment showed no signs of packing or planning beyond the weekend trip. Work emails scheduled for the following week were still queued. In the weeks that followed, search coordinators reviewed incident patterns. Falls accounted for a significant portion of backcountry fatalities, particularly in rocky drainages. However, repeated aerial sweeps found no anomalies. Canines failed to reacquire scent beyond the creek. The lack of debris or equipment was noted as unusual. A controlled sweep of nearby shelters was conducted informally by rangers in late June. They checked 2 lean-tos used by hunters and 1 outdated patrol shack. FS 1187 was not included due to its location outside the priority zone and its locked status. No record indicates anyone attempted to open it. Public interest in the case spiked briefly after a local newspaper ran a feature on solo hikers who disappeared without trace. Emily's name was listed alongside several unresolved cases across the West. Online discussion focused on wildlife, sudden medical events, and rare but documented cases of voluntary disappearance. Her family rejected those theories. Megan Carver continued to contact the sheriff's office every few months. She asked about new leads, about expanded searches after snowmelt. She offered to fund private efforts. Officials reiterated that without new information, there was little to pursue. In August of 2020, skeletal remains were discovered in a different section of the forest belonging to a missing hunter from Wyoming. The recovery renewed attention briefly, then faded. Emily's case remained inactive. By 2021, the trailhead log from Montgomery Pass had been replaced. The original was archived. Seasonal crews rotated. Memories faded. The cabin logs at FS 1187 showed no entries after 2018. Then, in October of 2022, Daniel Ortiz, a county maintenance worker assigned to inventory remote structures before winter, was given a list that included FS 1187. The task was routine. He was to inspect the roof, check for pest damage, and secure the door. Ortiz arrived at the cabin at approximately 10:20 a.m. He noted that the surrounding area was undisturbed. No recent footprints, no vehicle tracks. The lock showed normal wear. He unlocked the door using a master key and pushed it open. He later stated that the smell was the first thing he noticed. It was described as stale, but not putrid. There was no immediate indication of decay. The interior was dim. Light entered through two small windows. Ortiz saw a table, a cot against the wall, a supply shelf. Then he saw the woman. She was seated in a wooden chair pulled slightly away from the table. Her posture was straight. Her boots were planted flat on the floor. Her head was angled slightly downward, as if at rest. She did not move. Ortiz exited the cabin and called his supervisor. At 10:31 a.m., the sheriff's office was notified. Deputies arrived by helicopter at 12:14 p.m. The area was secured as a potential crime scene. The woman was identified visually by Megan later that afternoon. She was Emily Carver. She was wearing the same clothes she had left home in. Her backpack was on the floor beside her chair. It was partially unpacked. Supplies were neatly arranged. There were no signs of struggle. There was no damage to the cabin. The door had been locked from the inside. Forensic investigators documented the scene in silence. Photographs were taken before anything was moved. The position of Emily Carver's body was logged with exact angles and measurements. Her body temperature matched the ambient interior temperature. There was no active decomposition. No insect activity was immediately visible. The cabin itself was intact. No food containers were open on the shelf beyond standard issue supplies. Some items had been moved from their original positions, according to inventory records from 2018, but nothing was missing. The cot had not been used. Its blanket was folded at the foot. Emily's personal gear showed signs of long-term presence. Her water bottle was empty but clean. Her stove had residue consistent with repeated use. Several empty food wrappers were stacked inside a bag. A notebook lay on the table. It contained dates, short entries, and weather observations. The last entry was dated August 17, 2020. The writing indicated routine, short sentences, no emotional language. There was no mention of injury or fear. The final line read only, "Stayed inside today, wind." Medical examiners faced immediate questions. Based on the apparent preservation of soft tissue, they estimated death had occurred within weeks, not years. This was inconsistent with the timeline. DNA and dental records confirmed identity. There was no evidence of mummification typically seen in high-altitude environments over long periods. A post-mortem examination was performed in Fort Collins. The cause of death was listed as malnutrition and exposure complicated by prolonged isolation. There was no trauma, no toxins, no sedatives, no sign of restraint. Her stomach was empty. Her muscle mass showed significant atrophy consistent with extended calorie restriction. Her fingernails were trimmed. The investigation shifted from search to reconstruction. Officials confirmed that FS 1187 had a working wood stove and stored emergency rations intended for short-term use. According to Forest Service logs, the food supply included dried beans, rice, canned vegetables, and protein bars, intended to be rotated annually. However, due to staffing shortages, the rotation had not occurred between 2018 and 2022. Most of the food was expired. The cabin had a rainwater collection barrel outside. Investigators found it empty but functional. Snowmelt could be collected during winter by melting snow on the stove. Emily had written weather notes indicating seasonal adaptation. The question became how Emily reached the cabin and why she never left. Boot tread impressions outside the cabin were faint but present under accumulated debris. They matched Emily's footwear. There were no additional sets of prints preserved beneath them. This suggested she arrived alone. The route between the creek and the cabin was revisited. Search teams later determined that the unmarked service trail intersected the creek area where the dogs lost scent. Under certain light conditions, the turn was visible only from one angle. Emily's GPS unit was found in her pack. Its battery compartment showed corrosion consistent with prolonged exposure to moisture. There was no recorded track. Investigators concluded she likely relied on visual navigation initially. Interviews with Megan and co-workers focused on Emily's psychology. She was described as cautious but persistent. Once committed to a task, she would not abandon it easily. Her notebook supported this pattern. Daily entries documented minor repairs, ration tracking, and temperature readings. What disturbed investigators most was the locked door. The cabin's locking mechanism was tested repeatedly. It could only be locked from the inside with a key. The key was found hanging on a nail near the door. No duplicate keys were missing from the Forest Service inventory. No evidence indicated another person had entered after Emily did. Analysis suggested Emily had chosen to remain inside for prolonged periods, even as resources dwindled. Her physical condition at death suggested she had stopped eating gradually. Psychologists consulted on the case proposed a progressive resignation syndrome. Isolation, winter, no external cues, no rescue arrival. At some point, Emily may have decided not to attempt leaving. The chair faced the door. Investigators speculated she waited. Her personal locator beacon remained unused. Tests confirmed it was functional until at least 2020, based on battery degradation rates. No explanation fully resolved why she stayed. No evidence pointed to foul play. The case was officially closed in January 2023. Megan Carver received her sister's notebook and backpack. She declined media interviews. In a statement released through the sheriff's office, she said Emily trusted systems. She followed rules. She believed help would come. FS 1187 was decommissioned the following spring. The cabin was sealed permanently. Public reaction to the discovery was muted at first. The sheriff's office released a brief statement confirming Emily Carver had been found deceased in a remote Forest Service cabin. No photographs were shared. No press conference was held. Officials emphasized there was no evidence of criminal involvement. Within days, details leaked. Local reporters obtained portions of the inspection report. The phrase, estimated survival period, months to years, appeared in one paragraph. That line was repeated without context. Speculation followed. How someone could disappear within a heavily searched area, remain alive for an extended period, and never encounter another person became the central question. Investigators reviewed the original search grid in detail. Mapping software overlaid the 2019 search zones with the cabin's location. FS 1187 sat just outside the highest probability area. At the time, resource allocation favored drainages and cliffs, not elevated service structures that were presumed secured. No one involved in the original search was disciplined. Internal review concluded procedures were followed based on available information. The Forest Service released a separate statement acknowledging that several administrative cabins were not included in search parameters because they were locked and off official trails. The policy was revised. Emily's survival timeline became the focus of internal analysis. Based on the notebook, food packaging, and physical evidence, investigators concluded Emily reached the cabin on the first day of her hike. The earliest notebook entry was dated June 3, 2019, and read, "Found structure by afternoon, weather clear." She appeared to treat the cabin as a temporary shelter. Early entries documented daylight hikes in nearby areas, attempts to locate trails, and marker placements with fabric strips torn from an extra shirt. Several strips were later found tied to low branches within a half-mile radius, weathered but intact. After late June, entries shifted. Phrases became shorter, references to walking stopped, temperature notes increased. There were mentions of snow as early as September. One entry in November 2019 read, "Tried route south again, too steep, turn back." Another dated January 4, 2020, "Snow depth high, staying." Investigators assessed the possibility that Emily injured herself during one of these attempts. No fractures were found, but muscle degeneration and joint stiffness could have limited mobility over time. Malnutrition would have compounded the issue. Psychological consultation reports suggested a progressive narrowing of perceived options. Alone, without feedback, Emily may have reassessed her situation repeatedly, choosing what felt like the lowest immediate risk each day. Staying inside conserved energy, leaving required unknown exposure. Her notebook did not mention panic. There were no farewell messages. Her phone was recovered from the backpack. It powered on but had no service capability. Several unsent notes were saved in the device. They contained logistical reminders rather than emotional content. One read, "Check barrel after snow." Another, "Inventory rice." Data analysis showed the phone battery would not have supported prolonged usage. The lack of personal locator beacon activation remained unexplained. Behavioral experts suggested she may have reserved it for perceived life-threatening emergencies, believing rescue efforts were already underway or imminent. The cabin's windows faced dense forest. Visibility was limited. Helicopter flyovers during the original search did not pass directly overhead. The chair Emily was found sitting in was not originally positioned facing the door. At some point, it had been moved. There was no evidence she attempted to break the lock, no damage to the doorframe, no marks on the windows. Investigators concluded she accepted the cabin as her primary environment. The final weeks were reconstructed using physiological data. At severe calorie deficit levels, cognitive function declines, decision-making becomes conservative and repetitive, movement feels costly, time perception alters. The medical examiner noted that Emily's death was likely peaceful in physiological terms. The body showed no signs of acute distress at the end. For Megan, those findings did not provide comfort. In a private letter later shared with investigators, she wrote that her sister had done everything right. She planned, she prepared, she waited. No criminal charges were filed, no inquest was scheduled. FS 1187 was dismantled in late 2023. The materials were airlifted out. The site was cleared to bare ground. There is no marker. Maps no longer show the service trail. And the area where dogs once lost the scent remains unchanged. Internal documents, released later through open records requests, expanded on details not included in the public summary. These documents were compiled during a joint review involving the Sheriff's Office, the Forest Service, and two independent consultants specializing in wilderness survival failures. They focused on decision points. Emily Carver's situation differed from typical lost hiker cases in one key way. She was not disoriented in a broad sense. She understood where she was generally located. Her notes indicated awareness of regional geography. What she lacked was a reliable route back to known trails once snow and physical decline altered the terrain. The cabin logbook indicated no external visitors during the entire period, no aircraft landings, no maintenance crews. Weather records showed that snowfall in the winter of 2019-2020 exceeded the 10-year average by 30% in that area. Snowpack remained well into late spring. Investigators reconstructed a potential first-week sequence. On June 3, 2019, after losing the main trail near the creek, Emily likely followed terrain that appeared navigable. The unmarked service path would have felt intentional. It was partially cleared. It did not end abruptly, when it led to a structure that reinforced the decision. FS 1187 was designed to be visible once nearby, but not from a distance. The cabin blended into the tree line. It was painted a neutral brown. It had no signage visible from approach. The windows were small, designed to retain heat. Emily's first notebook entries suggested confidence. She wrote of staying overnight, then resuming movement in the morning. She noted the availability of shelter as a relief. Investigators underlined that word. From a survival standpoint, the cabin presented safety and risk simultaneously. Shelter reduced immediate danger. It also reduced urgency. Records show Emily attempted to relocate the main trail multiple times during the first 2 weeks. Fabric markers and disturbed ground supported this. Each attempt ended with her returning to the cabin before nightfall. She may have expected to intersect search teams. Sheriff's flight logs confirm helicopters passed within 3 miles of the cabin on 3 occasions in June 2019. None flew low enough to be heard clearly from inside dense timber. Emily's notes make no mention of aircraft. As days passed, Emily began rationing. She documented caloric estimates. She reduced movement. She adapted the stove for extended use. She recorded snowmelt yields. Her behavior aligned with trained survival protocols. At no point did she document a decision to permanently stay. The consultants identified a phenomenon often described in prolonged wilderness isolation cases, narrowing survival loops. The individual repeats what worked yesterday. Exploration declines. Risk tolerance drops to 0. Emily's physical condition followed that pattern. By late 2019, muscle mass loss would have made steep downhill travel dangerous. A single fall could have been fatal. Her notes referenced uneven footing and ice crust. Under those conditions, staying inside was the safer choice. The consultants noted another factor. FS 1187's door could only be locked from the inside, but it did not automatically lock. Locking it required intent. Emily locked the door consistently, according to key position records and hinge wear. This suggested a perception of external threat, or at least a desire for control. There was no evidence of another person. Investigators considered whether Emily could have been incapacitated by illness. Blood analysis revealed vitamin deficiencies consistent with starvation, but no infection or disease. There were no signs of encephalopathy, no brain trauma. Her cognitive decline was attributed to caloric deprivation and isolation. One internal memo referenced a similar case in Nevada where a solo prospector remained in a remote shelter for months despite having the ability to leave. That case ended when the individual was found alive but cognitively impaired. Emily did not leave. By mid-2020, her notebook entries became sparse. Dates were occasionally skipped, writing pressure weakened, spelling errors appeared. Still, the tone remained factual. The final entry, dated August 17, 2020, matched weather records indicating sustained winds and low cloud cover. After that date, there were no notes. Medical examiners estimated that her death likely occurred sometime in late August or early September of that year. Without precise markers, the estimate was broad. Her body position suggested she sat down deliberately. There was no indication she attempted to reach the cot. Investigators theorized she experienced orthostatic collapse, common in severely malnourished individuals. Sitting may have been easier than lying down. Her hands were placed in her lap without tension. The locked door became symbolic in later analysis. Experts cautioned against assigning emotional meaning. Locking the door conserved heat. It reduced animal entry. It was routine. But it also sealed her inside. When snow buried the service trail completely in winter 2000 and 2021, FS 1187 became effectively invisible. No one approached the area again until Ortiz's inspection 3 years later. The consultant's final report concluded that Emily Carver's death resulted from a convergence of minor navigational error, environmental factors, systemic search limitations, and prolonged isolation. They emphasized that no single failure explained the outcome. For Megan, the explanation did not soften the finality. In a follow-up statement submitted to the county in 2024, she wrote that her sister did not panic, did not give up, and did not make reckless decisions. She wrote that Emily waited correctly until waiting became fatal. After the consultant's report was submitted, the case shifted quietly into archival status. There was no public hearing, no formal apology. Agencies involved issued internal recommendations, most of which concerned expanding search parameters and maintaining up-to-date inventories of remote structures. None of those measures addressed the central detail that continued to unsettle investigators. Emily Carver had not been incapacitated when she arrived at the cabin. Evidence suggested she was physically capable of leaving for several weeks, possibly longer. She was not trapped by injury. She was not restrained by another person. The terrain south of FS 1187, while steep, was passable in summer months by an experienced hiker. This forced a closer examination of her decisions during the early phase. Behavioral analysts reviewed her notebook line by line. They compared entries to known survival case studies. A pattern emerged that did not match panic behavior or resignation. It resembled procedural persistence. Emily treated the cabin as a problem to be managed. She inventoried resources, she noted variables, she reduced exposure, she waited for verification. Search teams were active for 11 days after her disappearance. That knowledge was unavailable to Emily. From her perspective, the absence of rescue during that period may not have been alarming. She had registered her trip. She had signed trail logs. She expected detection. Her notebook entry from June 7, 4 days after arrival, read, "Signal likely missed. Continue visible routine." Investigators interpreted visible routine as her decision to remain near the structure, assuming aircraft or ground teams would sweep known installations. That assumption was incorrect, but not irrational. The consultants noted that Emily's compliance with safety norms may have worked against her. She did not behave unpredictably. She did not wander widely. She remained near what she believed would be searched. By late June, environmental conditions shifted. Afternoon storms became more frequent. Travel windows narrowed. Each delay reinforced the previous decision. Another layer emerged during a secondary forensic review of Emily's personal locator beacon. The device had not been activated, but tests showed it could have transmitted for at least 1 year if used intermittently. Investigators examined manufacturer guidelines. Activation protocols emphasized use only during immediate danger to prevent false rescues. Emily's notes reflect this mindset. On June 9, she wrote, "No injury, food stable, waiting still best." This line became central to later analysis. Experts argued that Emily did not classify her situation as an emergency until it was too late. The gradual nature of her decline offered no clear threshold for action. There was no single moment that demanded the beacon. As months passed, malnutrition altered her judgment. Yet by the time cognitive impairment would have been severe enough to explain inaction, her physical ability to travel was already compromised. The chair placement added another dimension. Forensic analysis showed that the chair had been positioned facing the door deliberately. The floor beneath it showed long-term weight compression. This suggested she spent extended periods sitting there. Investigators initially speculated she waited for someone to arrive. However, no footprints ever appeared outside after 2019. Snow records indicated that Winters erased any approach signs quickly. By late 2020, the area saw no human activity at all. Another possibility emerged. Sitting upright reduced energy expenditure compared to standing. It also allowed her to monitor the door without moving. Survival consultants compared this posture to similar cases of prolonged confinement where individuals adopt static observation points. It is not associated with hope or despair. It is associated with control. The locked door continued to trouble reviewers. The key was within reach. Unlocking it required minimal effort. Even in weakened condition, Emily could have opened the door. Why she did not attempt a final exit remains unanswered. Medical examiners noted no evidence of a terminal attempt. There were no scratches near the door, no signs of collapse near the threshold. Her body position suggested death occurred while seated. The final reconstruction proposed a narrow window. In late August 2020, Emily's caloric intake dropped below survivable levels. Cognitive clarity diminished. Muscle strength failed. Standing likely became dangerous. A fall could have meant immediate loss of consciousness in isolation. At that stage, leaving the cabin may have felt more threatening than staying. Her final actions appear consistent with risk minimization. She locked the door. She sat down. She remained still. When Ortiz discovered her 2 years later, the quiet of the scene gave the impression of intentional arrangement. Investigators cautioned against that interpretation. Physiological shutdown in starvation can be calm, movements slow, panic is not guaranteed. The cabin had preserved her in that position. When Megan Carver received the official findings, she requested one clarification. She asked whether her sister had suffered. The medical examiner responded in writing. He stated that while prolonged starvation involves discomfort, the final phase is often characterized by lethargy, reduced awareness, and minimal distress signals. He could not say more. Megan never disputed the findings. She never challenged the conclusion. She attended one private briefing, listened without interruption, and left without asking additional questions. In the years following, Larimer County updated its wilderness protocols. All locked structures within search zones must now be physically checked regardless of accessibility. The recommendation was adopted statewide. No memorial service was held at the site. There is no plaque. The coordinates of FS 1187 are no longer listed on public documents. What remains is a record of decisions that made sense in isolation, but not in outcome. The case might have ended there, archived under systemic failure and environmental misfortune, if not for one additional detail that surfaced during a routine audit in late 2024. It came from a source unrelated to Emily Carver. A retired Forest Service ranger named Paul Whitaker submitted personal field notes to a regional historical collection. Whitaker had worked the Medicine Bow Route District for over 25 years. Among his materials were handwritten route logs, maintenance observations, and informal annotations never entered into official databases. One entry, dated May 2019, caught an archivist's attention. It referenced FS 1187. Whitaker wrote that he had intended to inspect the cabin that spring, but abandoned the attempt due to lingering snowpack and unusual obstruction along the service trail. The note described a fallen tree combined with earth movement that partially covered the path approximately 1 mile from the creek junction. This detail had not appeared in any official report. Investigators revisited Whitaker's map markings. The obstruction, he noted, lay between the point where search dogs lost Emily's scent and the cabin. The location suggested that Emily may have encountered the blockage shortly after leaving the main trail. The obstruction did not fully block passage. It narrowed the visible path and forced a slight detour downslope before reconnecting. In summer conditions, it would have been navigable. In combination with fatigue or uncertainty, it may have altered her perception of direction. Whitaker's note added no evidence of criminal involvement. It did, however, underscore how easily a minor physical change could redirect a trained hiker into an unintended route. Another recovered document added context. During the original 2019 search, one volunteer team leader filed an optional after-action comment, stored separately from the main report. In it, he wrote that his team considered checking maintenance cabins, but decided against forcing entry due to lack of authority and absence of external signs. He noted uncertainty at the time. That comment was not revisited until years later. Investigators acknowledged privately that if FS 1187 had been unlocked in June 2019, Emily would almost certainly have been found alive. By then, that observation carried no procedural consequence. The final internal review addressed the psychological dimension more directly. It reframed Emily Carver's experience not as a mystery of disappearance, but as a documented case of prolonged containment without physical restraint. She was not held by geography alone. She was held by structured reasoning applied too consistently in an unstructured environment. Survival experts compared the case to laboratory studies in which subjects, given partial safety cues and delayed feedback, will often remain stationary long past optimal escape windows. Emily believed she was doing what she was supposed to do. When rescue did not arrive, she adjusted incrementally rather than radically. Each day made sense. Only the totality did not. Interviews conducted after the case closure included one with Daniel Ortiz, the maintenance worker who found her. Initially, he declined to comment publicly. 2 years later, he agreed to a brief recorded statement for training purposes. He described the scene as finished. He said there were no signs of chaos, no scattered objects, no sense of interruption. He said it looked like someone who had stopped moving, not someone who had been stopped. Ortiz stated that the most unsettling detail was not the body, but the notebook. He recalled flipping through it briefly before investigators stopped him. He said the writing did not sound lost. It sounded organized. The Forest Service quietly altered signage policies after the case. Unmarked service paths were either removed or explicitly labeled. Remote cabins were added to public databases with access notes. None of those changes would have altered what happened once Emily Carver sat down for the last time. Her death was not immediate, it was gradual, it left no single point of failure. That made it difficult to assign blame. It also made the case linger. In private correspondence, one consultant wrote that Emily's story was less about the wilderness than about delayed thresholds. When danger does not announce itself, action feels premature. When action finally feels justified, it may no longer be possible. This interpretation was never released publicly. Officially, Emily Carver died of environmental exposure, compounded by malnutrition. Unofficially, the case remained cited in training seminars as an example of procedural collapse under isolation. No one disputed that Emily followed logic. The fact that logic led her to remain seated in a locked room until her body failed continues to resist narrative closure. When Megan Carver was contacted about the newly surfaced Whitaker notes, she responded once. She wrote that knowing about the obstruction did not change her understanding. She wrote that her sister did not disappear because of one mistake. She disappeared because the system expected her to either leave or die quickly. She did neither. In the final accounting, Emily Carver's case was absorbed into institutional memory without resolution in the way people often expect resolution to occur. There was no singular error to correct, no perpetrator to name, no dramatic moment where the outcome could be reversed by a different choice clearly visible in hindsight. For agencies involved, the file was closed with annotations rather than conclusions. For those who studied it afterward, the discomfort came from how ordinary the sequence had been. Emily was not reckless. She did not improvise wildly. She did not abandon preparation. Her actions aligned with standard guidance in wilderness safety literature: find shelter, conserve energy, remain near a recognizable location, wait for rescue. The logic held until it did not. In follow-up trainings, instructors sometimes referenced the case without naming her. They described a hiker who became stationary too early. They spoke about the risks of static decision-making in environments that change faster than human expectations. Slides showed timelines, not faces. Emily's name was absent. Megan Carver declined to participate in these sessions. She kept the notebook in a sealed box. In later correspondence, she stated she had read it once, then put it away. She said it documented work, not fear. That made it harder to read. When asked if she believed her sister lost hope, Megan answered in a single sentence. She said hope was never the problem. The cabin site itself no longer exists. Satellite imagery from 2024 shows a uniform tree line where FS 1187 once stood. Without coordinates, it is indistinguishable from surrounding forest. Snowfall continues to accumulate there each winter. Meltwater runs toward the same creek where search dogs lost the trail. The service path that once led from that creek has been disrupted deliberately. Sections were regraded. Down timber was left in place. The intention was to prevent casual navigation into maintenance zones. No markers indicate why. Emily's Subaru was eventually released from impound and sold at auction. The buyer removed the license plates before driving it away. The vehicle now appears in no records connected to the case. Her phone was returned to her family after analysis concluded. It contained no final message, nothing addressed to anyone else. Investigators sometimes wondered whether a single deviation might have changed everything. A forced cabin entry, a wider sweep, an early beacon activation. These thoughts were usually dismissed as unproductive. Counterfactuals do not alter outcomes. What remained, instead, was an accumulation of silence. Emily Carver occupied the cabin alone for more than a year without any confirmed human contact. During that time, rescue resources passed within operational distance but not perceptual range. The gap between those two concepts proved critical. The locked door became shorthand in later discussions, but it was never fully explanatory. It represented control, conservation, habit, and routine. It did not represent entrapment in a physical sense. Emily could have opened it. That detail resists simplification. The medical findings suggested her final hours were not chaotic. There was no evidence of frantic movement or last-second attempts to escape. Her body did not collapse near the threshold. It remained where energy expenditure was lowest. This has been interpreted by some as surrender. Others described it as consistency to the end. Neither interpretation is provable. In the years following her death, missing person statistics in wilderness settings were updated to include a new classification used internally: prolonged stationary survival leading to delayed fatality. The category remains rare. There is no public-facing version of that terminology. Emily's case is sometimes mentioned alongside others involving isolation rather than immediate danger. It is distinguished by how long nothing happened. People often ask why she did not write more personal thoughts as time went on. Those who studied the notebook believe that was the point. Emily did not reframe her situation emotionally. She reframed it operationally until her body no longer supported operations. Her environment became smaller, her choices narrowed, her routine hardened. At the end, she did not stage anything. She sat. When Daniel Ortiz locked the cabin again after investigators removed her body, he followed protocol. He closed the door. He turned the key. He noted the time. Later, during debrief, he described the act as unnecessary but automatic. He said the cabin felt occupied even after it was empty. That feeling did not appear in any report. Emily Carver's disappearance is sometimes summarized as a failure of search coverage or as a lesson in survival psychology. Neither summary captures the weight of what occurred. She did not vanish. She remained present in one place, waiting for a process that never reached her. When the system finally found her, there was nothing left for it to do.